The door opened every evening at exactly 6:42 p.m. It wasn't a law written in a heavy, leather-bound book tucked away in some dusty archive. It wasn't a command issued by a visible master or a set of strict rules pinned to the refrigerator door for all to see. It was something far more binding, far more corrosive than any legal decree could ever hope to be. It was a habit, the most efficient, most terrifying form of soul-sucking labor ever devised by the human psyche. The ritual was so deeply ingrained in the fabric of their reality that the very molecules of the oak door frame seemed to stiffen and sigh, anticipating the vibration of the key before the cold, serrated metal even made its first contact with the lock. The house adjusted its internal pressure in absolute silence. The dust motes, suspended in the stagnant hallway light like tiny, forgotten stars in a dead galaxy, prepared to be disturbed by the exact same displacement of air that occurred at that precise second, 365 days a year. It didn't happen because it had to happen. It happened because it always had. And in the absolute, freezing vacuum of a dying human connection, repetition is the only thing that feels like solid ground under one's feet. Keys were placed in the same ceramic bowl on the entryway table with a calculated, surgical precision. The sound was a sharp, metallic clatter, a dissonant, percussive chord that echoed through the sterile hallway like a gunshot in a marble canyon. It was a signal, a wordless broadcast sent through the architecture. The external world had been shut out, and the internal performance had officially begun for the night. The clatter told the walls that the day had died, and the evening, long, hollow, and perfectly choreographed, was now in session. Shoes were tucked neatly by the wall, aligned with military precision, toes pointing toward a plaster surface that had nothing to say in return. A light was switched on in the hallway, casting a pale, clinical glow that reached into the dusty corners of the ceiling, exposing the lack of cobwebs and the presence of a profound, chilling order. The house recognized the pattern. It felt the weight of the inhabitants and relaxed into its familiar, cold role. This structure didn't need to be lived in, it didn't crave the messy, unpredictable heat of human passion or the erratic pulse of joy. It simply needed to be maintained. It required the changing of filters, the wiping of counters, and the silent, ghost-like occupation of its rooms. It was a museum of normalcy, and the exhibits were the people themselves, frozen in their roles. In the kitchen, a pot simmered on the stove, a rhythmic bubbling that was the only heartbeat the room had. The steam rose in a straight, thin line, a ghostly ribbon vanishing into the silver mouth of the vent without leaving a trace of scent or warmth in the air. There was no smell of garlic, no aroma of home-cooked comfort, no sensory chaos of a meal being crafted with warmth. It was a chemical process, the heating of nutrients to sustain the basic biological functions of those waiting. Someone stood nearby, their face bathed in the sickly, flickering blue light of a smartphone screen, scrolling through an endless feed of other people's artificial lives. Their thumb moved in a rhythmic, upward flick, a digital tick, a mechanical gesture of a mind trying to escape the immediate reality. They weren't looking for information, they were looking for a way to kill the seconds. They were waiting for the clock to move. Waiting for time to pass so the next ritual could begin. Life had become a series of waiting rooms, each one slightly colder and more silent than the last. Dinner's almost ready. The voice was flat, devoid of any inflection, warmth, or invitation. It wasn't a call to a loved one, it was a system notification, an automated update sent into the stagnant air of the home. They gathered around the table without being called, moving like shadows drawn to a flame that gave no heat. There was no shouting from the bottom of the stairs, no laughter echoing from the hallway, no "how was your day?" that carried any real weight. Just the synchronized movement of bodies. Chairs were pulled out with a rhythmic, guttural scrape against the hardwood floor, a sound that felt like it was tearing through the silence of the house. Plates were placed down with a muffled thud on linen placemats that were perfectly centered. No one asked who was hungry. Hunger wasn't a topic of discussion. Appetite was assumed, just like presence was assumed. In this house, you didn't eat because you were famished, you ate because the clock reached the designated hour of 7 p.m. They ate quietly. Not in a heavy, angry silence, the kind that follows a massive betrayal or precedes a violent storm. It was a vacuum. A hollow space where connection used to be, now filled with the sound of mechanical survival. The sounds were purely percussive and clinical. The rhythmic click of stainless steel forks against fine porcelain. The soft, rhythmic glug-glug of a glass being refilled with filtered water. A short, polite nod when a salt shaker was passed across the table, a transaction handled with the cold efficiency of a bank teller. If you looked through the window from the street, you would see the blueprint of a perfect life. The lighting was warm, the furniture was expensive and tasteful, arranged to create the illusion of comfort. The walls were filled with photographs, the physical evidence of a history that no longer felt real to those who lived it. There were framed memories of vacations to the coast, where the sun hit the water just right. Birthdays with colorful cakes and flickering candles that promised wishes that everyone knew would never come true. Smiles that had been practiced and approved in the hallway mirror before being frozen in time by the camera's shutter. In these pictures, everyone looked like they belonged. They leaned into each other, touching shoulders, looking like a cohesive organism. But the photos were beautiful lies. No frame captured the moment the smiles dropped like lead weights the second the camera was put away. No image recorded the way they drifted to separate rooms as soon as the social obligation of the memory was fulfilled. The photos weren't reminders of joy, they were the propaganda of a collapsing state, hung on the walls to convince the neighbors and themselves that everything was still fine. Conversations stayed safe. They stayed on the surface, where the water was calm and shallow enough to ensure no one would drown, but no one could truly swim either. The children learned early what kind of home this was. Children are mirrors, they reflect the environment long before they have the vocabulary to describe the pain of it. They learned that emotions were things to be handled privately, preferably alone in the dark where no one would be inconvenienced. They learned not to cry loudly, because a loud cry required an emotional response, and a response required an investment that the house wasn't prepared to make. In this house, tears were seen as a leak in the system, something to be mopped up quickly and ignored. They learned not to ask questions that slowed the rhythm of the evening. They became independent in the ways adults admire, the kind of independence that is actually a premature hardening of the heart. The parents noticed, sometimes, in the quietest, most vulnerable hours of the night when the hum of the refrigerator was the only pulse left in the world. They lay beside each other in a king-sized bed, facing opposite walls. The space between them was only a few feet of high-quality mattress, but it felt like a canyon that could swallow a city. There was nothing wrong enough to justify leaving. Just a slow thinning of the connection. One morning, the bed was made with a precision that felt final. A suitcase stood near the door. There was no confrontation. No shouting. No begging. Just a careful embrace. Counted seconds. Call when you arrive. I will. The door closed. The clock kept ticking. 6:41 p.m. 6:42 p.m. The door waited.